Hello everyone. My name is Ismail Zambat from School of Education. I and my colleagues, Christina Mio, Susie Marshall, and Evelyn McLaren will talk to you about our experiences with the mathematics courses offered for future teachers in the School of Education. So we will all each take turns and talk about our parts. Um, so, well, in talking to you about our experiences with the mathematics courses, we will mostly stay in the practice side of things rather than the research side. And in doing so, we will talk to you about our goals for these courses and the kind of activities we do with our students to reach those goals and how we monitor the progress um, towards these goals. Um, our overall goal is to um, um, well, our overall goal is to model the kind of teaching we would like our students to adopt in their future teaching. So in that sense, we want them to become these instructional designers through theory-driven experiences. So for this purpose, we engage them in activities that helps them perceive mathematics as a study of patterns, relationships, and concepts. They learn about how to listen to pupils, how to interpret and anticipate pupils' mathematical reasoning, track their learning trajectories. We give them experiences about the necessary subject matter knowledge that they will use to teach pupils in their future classes, the kind of pedagogical knowledge they need. We help them build confidence in putting principles in action and applying theory in practice. And we kind of help them to become designers of their own learning environments. And in that design, actually, the classroom environment, how the arrangement of seatings, the kind of questions to be asked, the kind of curriculum to be used, these are all involved in those. And we help them continually reflect on their own practice, actually. And at the end, we want them to have a dynamic view of planning, teaching, learning, and assessment, so that they don't develop a lesson plan and teach it for the next 20 years. Let's move on. All right. So I said that we want our students to experience what it means to be designers through theory-driven practice. Um, well, to do that, we run into some challenges in doing so. One of the challenges is we first would like them to unlearn what they have learned throughout their schooling. Like they have a different kind of conception of division. So we want them to unlearn it first, and then we reteach them about that concept. And in doing so, we benefit, for example, from certain theories in education. So here is an example of what we mean by benefiting from theories and teaching them about the theories. This is a number system. It's called Angsymanian number system. The numbers here, I'm going to explain to you this number system a little bit so that you understand what we mean by applying theory. In this number system, it starts with A. There are no numbers like we know in our base 10 system. So the system starts with an A and then continues with B, C, D, XA, then AA, BA, CA, DA, XB, and AB, and so on. And each consecutive number is A away from each other. Like B is A away from A, C is A away from B, D is A away from C. There are some numbers like XA or XXA. They're not necessarily 2 or 3 digit numbers, and they can be something like 6 or 7 in our system, right? So assume that we give you this kind of a new number system, and we ask you to figure out what is C plus D using your own understanding of addition. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it. How would you find C plus D? And now notice that this is not our system, so you cannot use our base 10 system to think about this. All right. So, well, it is hard, isn't it? I mean, it's a new brand new system, and we don't know how to operate with it. When we ask our students about this system, they normally do this, even though we constantly warn them about not to use our base 10 system. They say C is 3, D is 4, so C plus D is 7. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the result is BA. So they have no way of doing this other than going back to their base 10 knowledge, number knowledge. So at this point, we ask them, once they have enough experience with this system, once they investigate some calculations like XA times XA plus BA or D times XA kind of thing, then we ask them to reflect on their experience. So when someone run into a brand new system, how can that person think about that system? How can that person assimilate it? So they based on their experience and reflection on their experience, they say, well, we have to use our prior knowledge, and then we label it as assimilation principle of Piaget. So this is what we mean by teaching with theory. So we don't directly teach them about assimilation principle, but we have them experience it in a different environment and then reflect on that experience. And then we name that experience as assimilation. So this is what we mean by how we use theory in deriving instruction. And we will also talk to you about the different kind of components we use in our classes and different kind of activities we use. So overall, our style is we have them experience some activities and reflect on those, and then get made abstractions out of that reflection. And the kind of advice we give them is also aligned with what we do in our classes. So we don't tell them to use group work. And I mean, if we tell them you should use group work in your class, we also do it in our classes so that they experience it. Now, Susie Marshall is going to take over and talk to you about the kind of activities we use in our classes.
Hello, everyone. Hello. So I'm Susie Marshall, and I'm going to talk about some of these components. Now, these components that we're showing here are all things that we as professional teachers, and also research shows us, are important for our students to experience throughout our lessons and throughout our seminars. So the research that we draw on is the work of Paul Cobb and Erna Yackel, for example, when we're establishing the importance of classroom norms. We make specific reference to norms within a mathematical context. You see here pupils' reasoning and learning. So we draw on the work of Thomas Carpenter and his colleagues in their study on cognitively guided instruction, and also Randolph Phillips' work on project which focused on integrating mathematics and pedagogy. And what we're going to do is we're going to show you how we do this through our seminars. So if we can go on to the next slide, please, Ismail. So what you'll see here is this is a seminar that we did with our students. And this seminar is actually all about place value. However, it's really important that right from the start, we don't use that phrase, because what we want them to do is we want them to discover, the students to discover that themselves. So they're asked to work through this activity and through this lesson as a pupil. And we say to them that they can only use their knowledge of counting and grouping. So they're not allowed to use any kind of formula that they might have, that they think they might use. They can only come to this activity with that knowledge of counting and grouping. So students are given 80 matchsticks. And Ishmael, if you could start the animation now. So students are given 80 matchsticks. And what they're asked to do is work with others to group them into groups of 3, as you'll see is going on here. But we then ask them to go further and explore all groups of 3. For example, you can see 3 groups of 3 would be a group of 9. Okay. And then we ask them to think about, well, what about 3 groups of 3 groups of 3? So we have a group of 27 and so on. And once they've actually had this physical experience of grouping with the matchsticks, they're then asked to focus on the recording aspect that you can see on this table here. So they're given a specified number of sticks and group them into 3s. Again, considering all those groups of 3s that we've just highlighted there, and the individual sticks left over, which are indicated as 1s. Once they've tried different numbers of sticks, they're asked to think about the minimum number of sticks in a group, and in this case, that would be 0, and the maximum number of sticks in a group, and that would have to be 2, because if there were 3, that would obviously form another group. And how each group grows. And in this case, it's in 3, 9, 27, and so on. And once they've had experience grouping in 3s, we then do the same problems, but this time we're grouping in 5s, 7s, and then groups of 10. And then they go through this similar experience, but using a different manipulative, using interlocking cubes to form groups of 4, 6, and 10 respectively. Now, we're not going to go through this activity anymore, but now we're going to think about how this enables our students to focus on the components that we highlighted on that previous slide. So here you can see pictures of our students working on this activity, unfortunately on the floor due to our seminar group, but they are working on these activities themselves. And it's really important that our students work through these lesson plans, initially adopting that lens, as Ishmael talked about, that pupil lens. So they're only working with that knowledge of counting and grouping. And it means that because we've set limitations on their prior knowledge, they're able to experience what it means to be a pupil, developing their understanding of certain concepts. And the difficulties, that the pupils might face. And for many students, this is a totally different context because they are very familiar working in base 10, but now we're asking them to explore different bases. So they're not actually going to be acting, but experiencing what it might be like to be a pupil. So we analyze the lesson after they've experienced it as a pupil. We ask them to analyze it with a teacher's lens, focusing on the learning mechanism. And we do this through, first of all, analyzing teacher videos. We consider pupils developing conceptual understanding. We not only draw videos of that particular lesson in context, but we use videos from research projects like IMAP and use those to have a deeper analysis. Okay, sorry, next slide now, Ishmael, thank you. So after analysing this activity as a pupil, as I said, we ask them to think about it as a teacher through the teacher's lens, but we ask them to consider particular aspects of the curriculum design. So why did we say that certain prior knowledge was required, that knowledge of grouping, that knowledge of representing numbers? What was the purpose of each section? For example, we started grouping 3s, then 5s, then 7s before we finally got to 10. Why did we do that developmentally like that? Why did we change the manipulatives from sticks to interlocking cubes? Okay. How does each section contribute to pupil understanding? Why were they then asked to consider the minimum and maximum number in each group? What difficulties might this kind of lesson design cause? And how might this lesson support inclusion of all students? Through our discussions, what we're trying to do is encourage our students to make connections to what the big concepts and ideas are that are being targeted. How do these kind of concepts and ideas fit together? How do they fit within the curriculum for excellence and their experience and outcomes? And what all along, what we're aiming for is to focus on the depth of learning as well as the breadth. Okay, and I'm now going to hand over to Evelyn, my colleague.
Hi there. So I'm just going to build upon there in terms of how all those components blend together, as Susie was saying, with respect to subject knowledge to begin with. So they do all blend together and they complement each other within each session. So as students participate in each experience, from wearing the pupil lens, the teacher lens, and a mathematician lens, they also improve their understanding of content knowledge. So the example that you can see here would be demonstrating this when exploring place value, as Susie's already demonstrated, that the kind of grouping model. So here when we're looking at developing knowledge of place value as a special type of grouping. So in terms of our number system, we use base 10, so ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, etc. So they're considering grouping in tens and the power of 10 and what that means, rather than taking a more procedural approach to the number system. So in terms of the next slide, we think about how subject knowledge then impacts on assessment. So subject knowledge is kind of embedded in everything that's going on, and the impact that that then has on assessment is embedded in each session as well. So here we focus on teachers' attention on different ways to think about assessment. So we share examples that target conceptual ideas rather than purely procedural. So these real life examples encourage dialogue between our student teachers to consider a range of assessment opportunities. So what you can see here are two examples of assessing knowledge on digits, value, and place. So considering the associated vocabulary that goes along with those aspects. So in the first example, we're focusing on the digit of 4 and considering its place and its value there through a comparison between the two numbers and quantities that we've got there. And then in the second example, you'll see that there's more of a focus around the partitioning of numbers. So is it 3,000 or is it 3,000? So again, just by presenting similar problems around place value in different ways with different aspects of questioning, we're encouraging that active involvement in doing with understanding to provide our student teachers with opportunities to revise and improve their own thinking, as well as that of their learners, and how the learners can be involved in these types of discussions within the classroom, and the assessment opportunities that provides. In terms of what Ishmael was saying, that if we ask them to do it in a classroom, then we model it. So this is our way of modelling aspects of assessment as well as developing subject knowledge at the same time. So you'll see in the next slide that in other contexts within assessment, we take a very simple example and we approach it from a variety of angles. So for example, here, there is an issue about whether a given number is odd or even. So we go through different ways to ask the same problem and investigate its advantages and disadvantages. So for example, if we ask what kind of number is 51, then pupils will give a variety of responses, things like it's a nice number, it's a whole number, it's an integer, it's positive, it's my house number. Lots of different responses that pupils may give to that question. So what we aim to do in each session is we aim to model an interactive way of engaging with questioning as part of assessment. So going beyond just open and closed questions, we ask our students to engage in a variety of activities that allow them to really think about the types of questioning that they're presenting and what evidence that then gives them. So it actively engages our student teachers in the process of seeking and interpreting evidence, so that they're not only focusing on what it means to develop assessment opportunities, but they're also considering the possible responses that those opportunities may evoke in the pupils in their classroom, and then how they can then go on to address those types of questions in the classroom. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Christina, who's going to take you on to explore a few more of the components in terms of resourcing around that we use in each session.
Thank you, Evelyn. So I'll talk about classroom norms. In our seminars, we model the kind of interaction we want our own students to use when they are teaching in their classroom. And to do so, we make use of sociocultural theory, which says that every group operates with certain norms. But we are interested especially in socio-mathematical norms, and this term was coined by Yackel and Cobb, as Susie said before. And they use this term to talk about special standard patterns of behavior specific to mathematical activity. So the slide here lists some socio-mathematical norms that we want to encourage. So I'll focus on the third one as an example. So this one says, we ask students to explain their solutions using mathematical argumentation. So in the classroom, if a teacher wants to establish this socio-mathematical norm, every time a pupil wants to give an answer, then the teacher follows up with, well, how did you get that answer? So the pupil knows he has to explain. And if the teacher continues like this lesson after lesson asking, how did you get to the answer? Then the pupils learn that they cannot just give the answer, they also have to explain how they got to the answer. So they explain their solution method automatically, they don't need a teacher's prompt anymore. And so after a while, the class operates with this norm. So we do the same in our seminars. We want to establish certain norms with our own students so that they operate in certain desired ways automatically. And Susie also mentioned already that we share some videos, and we can have a look at the videos from different points of view. So we can have a look at videos to analyze classroom interactions. So thinking of what kind of socio-mathematical norm has been established in that classroom if we see this kind of behavior. Can I please have the next slide? This slide gives you an example of resources. So resources can be manipulatives, which can be concrete or virtual. Virtual manipulatives will be very useful in a situation like the current one in the world. However, we have to remember that these manipulatives, either concrete or virtual, they are not an end in themselves. They need to be used to teach mathematics, to enhance teaching, and to support conceptual understanding of mathematical ideas. So we integrate the use of manipulatives in our own seminars so that students experience how to use them to deepen the conceptual understanding of the mathematical concepts. And this slide here goes back to base 5, to this grouping activity. So we're used to base 10, but actually this virtual manipulative lets you group little virtual cubes in groups of 5. So again, a link to place value. Next slide, please. Thank you. Still about resources, we use technology as a means to support pupils' mathematical development. This slide shows an activity created using GeoGebra, which is a free software that you can use online. And it's a dynamic geometry software, and where students can drag shapes, stretch them, measure the sides, and they can think and learn about geometric relationships while they interact with this activity. And as students go through the activity, they learn more about the mathematical concepts, but at the same time, they can see how powerful this kind of activity can be, this kind of software can be to enhance their teaching. So again, we make them experience this firsthand during our seminars. So now I'll pass you back to Ishmael.
All right. Well, just a sec. So our team has a variety of schooling and academic experiences, so we bring them together, and we share our experiences with our classes in fortnightly meetings, sometimes in monthly meetings, and decide on further steps. We always reflect on our own classes. and we change the content and other logistics as needed. And we consider student feedback seriously. Here is one sample feedback about use of sticks. We take students' feedback seriously, and we reflect on that feedback, and like this is the feedback we got in the first semester. We're also getting one here this semester. We also get feedback using system-wide sources like Evasys and other kind of sources school used. So this is basically what we do in our classes, and how we organize our students' experiences so that they become future teachers. And we can take any questions at this point.
Great, thanks very much, everyone. That was a great presentation. So if you do have questions, you can drop them into the question and answers box through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I had a couple to get us started off. And I wondered, you kind of touched on it right at the end there, where you had a tweet that said this was a fantastic lesson. But my question was how the students respond to it when they're told to group the sticks in threes when everybody's used to jumping in tens, sort of like with a broader curiosity about how the students deal with being forced to do something that actually they feel like they know one way of doing, and they're told they can't do that anymore. Because I'm not a mathematician, so I'm wondering what my students might respond like if I tried that type of thing. So what's your experience?
Well, let me take a grab on that. When we first introduced the activity, they keep thinking about what is this about? What mathematical idea is this about? They don't think about place value. So they are kind of grouping things, but at the same time they're thinking about, so where does it go? Until after grouping by 10, they don't realize that it is the idea they're working on is place value. And working with sticks also gives them a different flavor than working with cubes, because if we start with cubes, it would remind them about the base 10, and they can all of a sudden go back to their old ways of thinking about place value. We didn't want that. So that's why we engage them in a brand new experience, so that they don't use their prior knowledge. I mean toxic prior knowledge, when I say prior knowledge, so that they can just pay their attention to that grouping activity. What are we grouping? What is the group size? What's the minimum number in a group? What's the maximum? How do we move from one group to another group? So once they get enough experience with groups of 3s, 5s, 7s, then 10s, now grouping by 10s, when they look at a number like 123, now they have 3 leftovers. They have 2 groups of 10s instead of 2 10s, and they have 1 group of 10 groups of 10s instead of 100s. So it becomes more meaningful at a later stage. So that's why we did it that way. I don't know if anyone else want to add to it.
If I can add, maybe I found some students are a bit resistant at the beginning, and I think it's that wanting to know, where is this going? I should know this. Why don't I know exactly what is coming next? Why am I not in control of this? And I think it's really good for them to experience that, because that is, I think, what some pupils will experience in the classroom. So being in that, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on here, I think it's good for them to experience that, because hopefully they will remember that when they teach pupils.
Yeah.
They also learn how to operate like a pupil. Yeah, Susie.
Yeah, I was just going to say one more thing as well, is a lot of our students, or not a lot of our students, but some of our students have a very negative view on maths, and they don't recognize themselves as effective mathematical learners. And I think one of the things that we try to do is really support them to see that actually all people can be effective mathematical learners. And so going through those kind of activities really supported their understanding of what is happening within our number system.
Okay.
I think it also encourages the students to make connections to prior knowledge as well. within that particular example of sticks, a lot of the students were thinking about 3 times table because it was a way they could relate bundling things in threes rather than seeing it as place value at the beginning. So they're starting to make lots of different connections to previous knowledge, just not really sure where it fits in. And as Christina said, that's the experience a lot of the pupils have in the classroom.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I did have another question that I wanted to ask you, but I'm conscious that we're kind of up against the time with this one. So I'll catch you afterwards and find a way to. But thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Andrew, if you could help me